Welcome to the New Books Network.
I'm Caleb Zakarin, editor of the New Books Network. Today I'm thrilled to launch a brand new series for the Princeton UP Ideas podcast. 20 years ago, Princeton University Press published a short volume with an excellent title, On Bullshit. Written by philosopher Harry Frankfurt, On Bullshit was adapted from an essay that explored the meaning, uses, and consequences of bullshit. At just 80 pages, On Bullshit became a favorite of readers, selling over 1 million copies and spending 27 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. It's not often that a work of philosophy breaks through to the mainstream, but readers of On Bullshit quickly discovered why. Harry's meditation on the meaning of bullshit can be read in one sitting, but the ideas have staying power. After you read Harry's book, you start to see bullshit everywhere and recognize its uniquely pernicious effects, whatever's left of the public square. Harry wrote his book long before modern social media and AI-generated slop. It was unbelievably prescient, making On Bullshit required reading for today. Harry sadly passed in 2023 at 94 years old, but his ideas live on. In this series, we'll speak with scholars whose lives and work have been influenced by Harry and his seminal book. To kick things off, I was speaking with Pamela Hieronymi, one of Harry's former students. Pamela's professor of philosophy at UCLA and a leading scholar in the field of moral philosophy. Like Harry, her work has resonated outside the academy. She served as an advisor on the sitcom The Good Place, which brought philosophical concepts like the trolley problem to a mainstream audience. For the first episode in the series, Pamela will introduce readers to both the book and the man who wrote it. In subsequent episodes, I'll speak with other scholars who explore Harry's notion of bullshit, politics, science, and more. If you haven't read On Bullshit, you should pre-order the anniversary edition, which is set to release on August 5th of this year. Now, let's have ourselves a bull session. Pamela, thanks for joining me today on the New Books Network.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
I'm absolutely thrilled to get the chance to speak with you about this book. This is one of those books where, if you've just been in a bookstore, you've probably seen it. It has an incredibly iconic cover, which I imagine probably has something to do with why this book sold so well. But a book doesn't sell 1 million copies by just having an intriguing cover and an intriguing title. The content actually really matters too. And I think that there's a reason why this book has sold so many copies. And I think you're such a wonderful person to speak with. Probably the next best person to Harry. Obviously, unfortunately, we can't speak with Harry anymore, but you knew him very well. And I'm wondering if you could just talk about what it was like when you first met Harry and what he was like as a teacher and a mentor.
So I first met Harry as an undergraduate and a new philosophy major. I took a course from him, a seminar. I believe it was maybe a 12-person seminar, and he was impressive and intimidating and funny, and undergraduate me just wanted to soak up everything he had to say. I was new to philosophy, so I was new to this exciting way of thinking that matched I'm twisted in just the right way to find it compelling. And then I was in a senior seminar with him on freedom, and the topic of my senior thesis was human freedom. And so that year I was getting freedom from everyone, including Harry, and he was then the second reader on that thesis. So I had those undergraduate experiences with him. I remember I was very pleased that he got to meet my parents when I graduated. We had a little reception, and he had a reputation of being sort of curmudgeonly and gruff, but he's in fact a very warm person and a funny person, and was someone with a good sense of humor. He and his wife then moved out to Los Angeles when they retired, first part-time and then later full-time, and actually moved into the same condo complex that my husband and I were living in. So we got to know them better then, and I made the, for me, somewhat challenging transition of going from calling him Professor Frankfurt to calling him Harry. And it was wonderful to be able to become friends with somebody who had been such a formative influence on my intellectual career, and actually such a powerful, the letter of recommendation he wrote for me when I applied to graduate school was certainly made a huge impact on my overall life trajectories. My senior thesis, the first several chapters were on Harry's work, and Harry's work has served as a kind of model for me since then. He writes short essays in a very clear and accessible style, drawing our attention to facts about life that, while in some sense obvious, have been overlooked by philosophers and others. And On Bullshit's a perfect example of that.
On Bullshit begins with him basically saying that he's not going to do a review of the literature that's come before. Obviously, he does this. You had discussion of the works of other philosophers. He talks about the definition of humbug and all sorts of other investigations of topics that are in the vein of bullshit and what bullshit is. But he definitely seems that, at least in this piece, he's interested in exploring something, like you said, that might be quite overlooked. And I'm wondering for you, how you first encountered On Bullshit, because it obviously became famous 20 years after its life, which I'm sure was quite unexpected for him and an unusual occurrence for an essay like this that was just published in a journal to then have this afterlife as a best-selling book.
So I probably first encountered it as it was reprinted in his 1988 collection, The Importance of What We Care About. But I don't actually remember. I mean, I read that collection as an undergraduate, and I'd be shocked if I didn't read it then. As I was finishing graduate school, there was a conference in Harry's honor that I went to. And that conference included a after-dinner address by Jerry Cohen on bullshit. And then Harry's reply to that after-dinner address is reprinted in the 20th anniversary edition. So I think I then had it drawn more firmly to my attention at that point in connection with that conference.
Yeah, the 20th anniversary edition. Obviously, it's a book that people can pick up now and they can read the original essay as it was printed. But definitely the new edition is certainly worth picking up for those reasons. In the book, Harry draws a sharp line between lying and bullshitting. And I think oftentimes people might use these terms interchangeably, but I think that the discussion that he has about the difference between the two is actually quite revealing. So how does he distinguish these two topics?
Yeah, this to me is the main brilliance of his discussion, is to distinguish between the liar and the bullshitter. And the bullshitter doesn't even, so to speak, rise to the level of the lie, because the liar is somebody who is trying to keep the truth from you. And if they want to keep the truth from you, they have to keep track of it. Whereas the bullshitter doesn't care about the truth. So they're not trying to keep it from you. They're not even keeping track of what's true and what's false. The bullshitter is instead trying to do something to you. They're trying to get you to buy the car or think they're great or laugh at their story, but conveying to you something for your belief or disbelief is not what they're up to. So while the liar is concerned with the truth and is taking care to make sure you don't get on it, the bullshitter isn't concerned with the truth at all. And then Harry draws out another consequence of that, which is that the thing that the bullshitter does have to hide from you is the fact that they're bullshitting, he thinks. The fact that they're trying to get you to do something. I don't actually know if he puts it as getting you to do something, but the fact that they're not keeping track of the truth. Whereas the thing that the liar is hiding from you is the truth. But that's what he says. I'm not completely sure that people can't be bullshitting and doing so explicitly, like in the bull session that he considers. But he does say at one point that it's something about themselves that the bullshitter might be trying to hide from you.
Obviously, bullshitting and lying are acts, but he also looks at the bullshitter or the liar, the person doing the act or engaging in that act. So how does he think about who is more dangerous, the bullshitter or the liar?
I'm pretty confident he thinks the bullshitter is the more dangerous because the bullshitter doesn't care about the truth. And he thinks of the truth as essential to, that care for the truth is essential for human society or for human beings. And so somebody who is uninterested in the truth is more dangerous than somebody who might be hiding the truth from you for a particular purpose at a particular point in time.
Do you think that he had particular people in mind, or was he just speaking of a general human phenomenon that he was recognizing?
I don't know the answer to that. I suspect he was, interested in speaking to the general human phenomena, but I don't know whether he in fact had particular people in mind. In talking about the lack of concern for the truth, it does bring to mind a thought I've had recently about what can be so confusing about our present political discourse, which is that for most of us, we were raised so that we make decisions in something like the following way. You start with a sense of what's true, what the world is like, and then you add to it a sense of what kind of moral constraints you're under, which things you're allowed to do and you're not allowed to do for society. And then from there, you figure out what you want to do and what to do. And it occurred to me that often those in power at this point run in exactly the opposite direction.
Yeah, would you say it's similar to maybe like just having a extremely strong dogma? Because in a way, it seems like there isn't even a dogma present. It's just whatever comes to mind that's useful in that situation that can achieve some end. Almost not even necessarily in like I'm trying to achieve a certain end, but just like this seems to fit, so let me just say it.
I think it does have to do with achieving an end. So I don't think Harry emphasizes this in the essay as much as I might, but I think that the bullshitter is very much has an agenda. And then the truth is sacrificed in the service of the agenda, but not in the way of the liar. It's not hidden. It's just disregarded. So the bullshitter who wants to sell you a car is determined to sell you the car. And they themselves aren't exactly lying because they're not even keeping track of the truth. So you can't quite accuse them of lying. They're bullshitting. The person who's telling you a tall tale to make you think they're funny or that they're great, their goal is to make you think they're funny or that they're great. And, the details of the story are not important. And sometimes that's fine with us because sometimes we understand that they're telling us a tall tale and that's okay. But the administration has an agenda of doing the things that they're going to do, and then they'll tell whatever stories they need to tell around that to make that seem okay. And they come up with the stories immediately because they don't care really about what's true or false. They care about putting on a good face and sort of dominating the narrative. So that lack of constraint is in the service of some agenda. And I do think, though Harry doesn't emphasize that, I do think that the agenda or the aim is an important part of the sort of logic of the bullshit.
I want to get into the relevance of the book today, but I also want to acknowledge, as at the top, like this book sold over 1 million copies. It's obviously once it comes out, it'll sell a lot more. I'm certain of it. It's just an absolutely staggering, remarkable number for people that don't know much about the book industry. Selling 1 million copies is like one of the most unbelievable achievements that you can possibly have in the book world. It's truly a remarkable figure. At the time, Harry got some press. He was on Jon Stewart and made a bit of a splash, and his message really seemed to resonate with people at that time in 2005 when it came out. Why do you think that it resonated so much then?
I think because the thing that he's drawing our attention to is so prevalent and yet not something that's been theorized or conceptualized in quite the way that he can theorize it. And it's extremely helpful to theorize it that way. It's extremely helpful to enable you to understand that, you're the salesperson or your doctor or your colleague who has in mind the thing that they want you to do and is just talking to you to get you to do that they're not exactly lying. Like their own relation to what they're doing is not what you might have initially thought when you just think that they're not telling you the truth. And, as kids, we're all taught about lying and we have that category very firmly in our head. But the way in which this is different is important, and it's helpful to have it as a category. And once you see the category, you see it repeatedly. My former colleague Aaron James had a similar book that he wrote later called "Assholes: A Theory," and it's the same. It's the same thing. It's like he's got a sort of theoretical structure for something that's very familiar, and once you have the structure in mind, you see it over and over again, and it is clarifying of your experience.
Yeah, it's another great title. It's definitely there's something to the the profanity laden title that definitely I think attracts the general reader. I mean, it attracts anyone. I think you see this title like on bullshit, and you're like, what's that about? I think what's really interesting is just the how profoundly prescient Harry's book feels today. Obviously, when he first wrote it, he was lamenting, communications technologies and the proliferation of bullshit. He wasn't saying that that bullshit is something that's new, but just that there was something about the way that modern society was structured that allowed for more bullshit to confront us in our daily lives. And it almost feels like, compared to back when he initially wrote it, it's like night and day. It's so much worse now. So could you talk a little about some of Harry's conclusions and why it's even more relevant for today?
Well, I think it's more relevant for today simply because I do think there's more bullshitting today than there was in the decades ago that he wrote it. I mean, he starts by wondering whether that's true. He starts by noting that it seems to him that there's more bullshitting at the time that he wrote it than earlier, and he wonders whether that's just because there's more talking or more text, and maybe the proportion of bullshitting isn't changing. But my strong impression is that if not the proportion, certainly the salience of the bullshitting has changed. It has changed. That there's a lot more people who have agendas and are saying things simply in order to give you a certain impression of themselves, like his example of the patriotic speech, or wave their card carrying whatever that they are, make sure that you know that they're a card carrying progressive or a card carrying Republican or a card carrying whatever they are, or simply repeating the talking points without having thought about them because you want to, for example, be accepted in this conversation. All of those things here are things that Harry would consider bullshitting. He gives the example of the conversation between a student and Wittgenstein when Wittgenstein really takes the student to task for using what seemed like a completely ordinary metaphor, and Harry understands that as Wittgenstein being upset that the student hadn't thought through what she was saying. And the amount of just talking without thinking it through is stunning.
One aspect of this work that really stood out to me is how funny it is. Like, there are some lines in it that are genuinely hilarious. Like, his wordplay is quite incredible. Like, there was one particular line, I just to slightly paraphrase it, but he talks about bullshit being unformed, and he says, "Carefully wrought bullshit requires an inner strain," which I just thought was like an absolutely hilarious line, and evocative in ways that you don't necessarily normally expect in a scholarly work. And sometimes people think about philosophy and scholarship as very serious, something that we have to treat almost, as sacred. But he introduces a lot of humor to the discussion. Why do you think it's important for there to be humor in addressing and dealing with serious topics? Or why did Harry think that?
Oh, I don't know if he thought that as much as he did it. Like I said, he had a great sense of humor, but humor, I mean, it is exactly a thing that we go to when things get a little too serious. So it's exactly when things get a little too tense that it's time to break the tension with a joke. But I mean, philosophy is funny. As you mentioned, I helped Mike Schur with The Good Place, or I consulted with him about his project, The Good Place, and he found he found philosophy hilarious, things that it hadn't even occurred to me were hilarious until he pointed them out. Philosophers, we think in a very controlled, tight way that enables the kind of analysis that you see in this book. But, if you're spun that tightly, a bunch of stuff is going to strike you as funny. And then Harry had just a sort of dry way of calling to attention those sorts of incongruities.
This isn't a book with a plot or a story, really. There are little stories strewed about. I don't know if that is necessarily what animates it, but given your work on The Good Place, how would you advise a filmmaker who wanted to adapt On Bullshit for the screen?
It's an interesting question. I definitely wouldn't be advising them on the narrative. I mean, the thing that was so wonderful to me working on The Good Place with Mike Schur is that his gift and talent and skill set are all about story and narrative, and mine are not. Mine are about argument and analysis. And what was wonderful about working with him was seeing what he saw, the ways he saw to bring the things that I understood into a story. And so it was extremely gratifying for me to be able to translate what I knew and the thoughts I've been taught by Harry and others for him so that he could then do his magic. So I think I would be just the wrong person to advise on how to make it into a story, though very happy to talk through how to think about it how to think about philosophy that can seem too abstract, too overwrought, too difficult, how to think about it in more concrete and livable terms, which was Harry's gift, one of his gifts.
That's very interesting. And The Good Place, for those who haven't seen it, is a really entertaining show that does actually a great job in many cases of teaching philosophical concepts. Like I bet it's the type of show that could easily be used as like a teaching aid in like a high school class, or honestly even a college class for like a fun, it's a fine end of semester pizza party day. I'm wondering, if you just had sort of one pitch to give to someone if they were asking you why they should read On Bullshit, what's the thing that really sticks out to you the most?
I may be repeating myself, but it really is the way in which he characterizes the difference between lying and bullshitting, and the way in which he characterizes what is happening to you, so to speak, when you are the target of bullshit, when somebody is bullshitting you. It gives you a better understanding of your situation and a better understanding of your reaction to it as well.
I completely agree. And I do think that this is a book that it's so easy to read. Like you can honestly read it in under an hour, and it is one of those books that sticks with you. Like there are certain lines that I think about. It's a funny book. It's interesting. It's engaging. You don't need to have read any other philosophy to be able to engage in it, which I think is one of the best things. One thing that I was wondering, you as someone who's so familiar with his work, obviously On Bullshit is just one thing that Harry wrote. He had such a large, expansive career. Are there any other ideas or works or things that you think people who read On Bullshit and find it interesting and find his style interesting that they might go and read afterwards?
I'm so glad you asked that question. Yeah. Definitely this was not what Harry thought of as his highest and best work. And it's not what he's most known for within the field. Within the field, he's most known for his work on freedom of the will, and probably I once asked him what his favorite of his works were, and he said freedom of the will and the concept of a person, which is probably his most cited. I haven't checked, but I would guess that's his most cited article in philosophy. It's not my favorite. My favorite is The Importance of What We Care About, which is the title essay for his first collection. And that would actually be the essay that I would recommend for reading after On Bullshit. I think it's an amazing essay. It's a bit longer and maybe a bit more demanding, but it opens with Harry saying that we need to start a new branch of philosophy, that we already have one branch of philosophy that's concerned with what we should believe, that's epistemology, and another branch of philosophy concerned with what we should do, that's ethics. But we need a branch of philosophy concerned with what we should care about and what is of importance. And so that's the importance of what we care about is what he proposes. But then he goes on to point out the way in which our cares are not something, the way in which our cares and our decisions don't always march together. And as a scholar of free will, or somebody working on the topic of free will, the observations in that essay are at once completely familiar and completely upending of the way many philosophers had been thinking. So he points out that when Martin Luther, during the Protestant Reformation, stands before the Council of Worms and says, "Here I stand, I can no other," that is, in fact, historically a moment of extreme individual autonomy. You have one man standing up against the most powerful institution of his time. So this extreme expression of individual autonomy. And yet, Luther says, I can't do otherwise. He says, I don't have a choice here. Okay? And Harry wants to take him at his word and say he is at once, this is an expression of freedom, of autonomy, of liberation, and yet there's also constraint. And that insight, I just find, in a way, that's the insight that launched my career, or my line of thinking. One of the things he says in there, which is I more or less have it memorized. He says, if we consider a person's will as that by which he moves himself, then what he cares about is far more germane to the character of his will than the decisions and choices he makes. Basically, your decisions and choices are kind of surface level. The real thing that moves you is what you care about. And that distance between our ability to make choices and what we actually care about, I think, is fascinating. And so anyway, that's the essay that I would recommend next if I had one. And then he goes on and he has another collection. He has a book on love, necessity, volition, and love. He started with a short book on Descartes. Any of these are great. My favorite is The Importance of What We Care About, the essay.
What of your own work would you recommend if someone, wants to go on a Harry Frankfurt deep dive in there, after they read On Bullshit, they go and read that work. What then of your work should they go and read next?
So mostly Harry's other work has influenced my work tremendously, but On Bullshit came up more recently as I was working on the idea of taking responsibility and then articulating what I call the blame game, what I think we all call the blame game. In the moral responsibility literature, there's a lot of different things people are after when they think about moral responsibility, a lot of different things they have in mind. But one is what we all know of as the blame game. And when the blame game happens when there's some mess. That mess was the foreseeable consequence of somebody's action. So somebody is at fault for the mess, and now somebody has to clean it up. And we usually think that the person who made the mess is the person who has to clean it up. And the blame game happens when we are trying to play hot potato with who has to do the cleaning of this mess, who's at fault and who has to do the cleaning. And the blame game, it doesn't have to be a moral issue at all. For example, when you have a lecture class that's going badly, which is something that I have unfortunately have some experience with, you'll get the blame game going pretty quickly. So the instructor is likely to blame the students, thinks that the students are not coming prepared or asking good questions or paying attention, or they're on their devices. The students are likely to blame the instructor. They're going to think that the instructor isn't making the material accessible, that they're not having good visuals, that they're droning on in a monotone. And so here there's a mess, and each party is trying to shift responsibility for that mess and for its cleanup to the other party. That, I think, is the blame game. And there's lots of moves in the blame game. And we are seeing a lot of them vividly on display right now. The amateur level move is to make excuses, to say why it's not your fault, why it's the other person's fault. A kind of pro level move is to turn yourself into the victim, and so that gets called fragility sometimes, but there's a variety of kind of pro level moves of fragility. One is simply, how could you ever think I would do that? How could you ever say that of me? Just to be offended by the accusation. Another is whataboutism. Well, what about that time you, right? Like turning it back on the other person. One of the most vivid that's repeats over and over again right now in the press and in our culture showed up on the playground as, I know you are, but what am I? I know you are, but what am I? So here the strategy is, whatever you're being accused of, you accuse your accuser of that same thing. It's stunning how well that works, given how obviously nonsense it is, right? Like, it doesn't matter how plausible the counter accusation is. Like, you're the one creating false news. You're the one undermining democracy. You're the racist. It doesn't matter how little evidence there is for the counter accusation. It works in changing the topic. And I think it works because the person who is making the initial accusation really cares about that accusation, really cares about racism or truth or what have you. And so when the accusation comes back at you, now either you're put off balance. You're either having to stop and consider, like, oh my God, am I really the racist? Or you're having to defend yourself. No, it's not true. And so attention is shifted then from the person who was the initially accused to the other person. But that's a piece of bullshit, right? That's a piece of just saying stuff in order to accomplish a purpose. And here the purpose is to make a move in the blame game. So in thinking that through, I found the conceptual tool of bullshit versus lying to be extremely useful.
I think that really helps actually make the distinction make sense, because of the extent to which it's almost like bullshit is introducing new material, where lying is just the attempt to negate the truth. So bullshit like proliferates in a way that like lying can't, because if you're trying to cover up a lie, then it can be about there still is in a way like this fixation on what is the truth, where the bullshit, there's just new things that you constantly have to counter. It reminds me in many ways of this strategy that I used to see like when I was in high school debate called spreading, where basically, the number of arguments you could throw in would counter score. It didn't matter how bad some of the arguments were. If you had 15 arguments and the other person had 3 arguments, even if those 3 arguments were better than the best 3 arguments given, it didn't matter, because this person had 15 arguments and you didn't have time to respond to the 12 other arguments that they gave. So in many ways, it's a sort of a strategy of bullshitting.
Exactly.
And it's definitely something that I feel like, if you flood the zone, I think Steve Bannon coined that term. If you flood the zone, then you can't really contend with everything. He's one of the greatest bullshit artists out there. So there's lots of examples. Just fire up the internet and you'll find a million examples of the types of things I think that you describe. And I think that you're absolutely right, that there are certain moves or approaches that people use in the blame game that are like that are better than others, and a lot of them do employ this tactic of bullshit more effectively than maybe just simple lying.
Absolutely.
Well, Pamela, it was so wonderful to get the chance to speak with you about On Bullshit. It's great to hear the way in which it's influenced your work, and I do think that with On Bullshit coming out again for its 20th anniversary, in many ways it's the 40-year anniversary of the essay, that it will inspire new scholars, new thinkers, new artists, people that want to take up Harry's ideas and try and apply them to the world we're living in today. I think that there's a lot that can be done to update some of his ideas, even if he was extremely prescient. So, I'm really looking forward to continuing this series and speaking with more scholars, people with different focuses on politics and science and other topics that really do have their own problems of bullshit that can effectively be dealt with the employment of this essay. So thank you so much, Pamela. It was really great to have you on for the inaugural episode.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.